Karen called the cops on my dad. She didn't know he was the new sheriff in town. She came storming out with a neon clipboard and a Bluetooth earpiece like she was headed to war. You can't just park here. This isn't public property. My dad glanced up from the toolbox in the back of his SUV and wiped his hands with a rag. Calm, quiet, the way he always was when trouble barked louder than it bit. "Ma'am, I'm helping my daughter move in," he said. She didn't even look at him, just whipped out her phone and started dialing. "I'm calling the police," she said. "You look suspicious. We don't tolerate trespassers in this HOA. I stepped down from the porch, moving fast. "You're calling the cops on my father. He's not supposed to be here," she snapped. "He doesn't look like a resident, and he's making people uncomfortable." Uncomfortable. That word again, like it was a weapon. She didn't know. She had no idea. The man she was reporting was the new sheriff of this town. And by the time the cruiser rolled up and dispatch confirmed his name, Karen's whole fake HOA empire was about to go up in flames, one clipboard lie at a time. My dad had only been in town 2 weeks. We'd moved him here after Mom passed a fresh start. Closer to me. Closer to peace. He didn't want a parade. No welcome committee. Just a place with trees, a porch swing, and a bit of land he could call his own. He'd retired from law enforcement the year before. 31 years as a decorated deputy in a bigger county. Never once written up. Never once media shy, but tired. Tired of politics. Tired of watching good people get silenced by bad systems. He thought this town would be quiet. He didn't plan on becoming sheriff, and he sure as hell didn't plan on Karen. The day she called the cops on him was supposed to be a happy one. We were unpacking his tools, setting up his shed, letting the dogs stretch their legs. He parked on the street in front of my neighbor's vacant rental just for 20 minutes while we moved the heavy stuff. That's when she came stomping across the grass in yoga pants in judgment. "You're blocking community traffic flow," she snapped, pointing at the truck. "There's no curb, ma'am," Dad said, straightening up, "and no cars have passed all morning." "You're not registered with our HOA," she said, pulling out a clipboard with pink Post-it tabs flapping like angry flags. "This is a restricted street. You need to leave." Now, I came down the porch, waving. "Hi, I live here. That's my dad. He's just helping me move some equipment. We're almost done." Karen narrowed her eyes at me like I was some kind of rebel. "That doesn't give you a free pass to break our compliance code." I stared at her. What she didn't answer. She just started filming. "I have a trespasser," she said into the phone. "Unlicensed vehicle, male, early 60s, potentially aggressive. We've had issues with this family before." Dad didn't even blink. He just leaned against the truck, arms folded. I whispered to him, "You want me to stop her?" He smiled. "Nope." "Let her dig." 15 minutes later, a patrol cruiser rolled into the cul-de-sac. Officer Reyes stepped out a rookie, fresh out of academy, chest puffed like he'd swallowed the entire training manual. He looked between Dad and Karen. Dispatch said we had a disturbance. Karen jumped in like she'd rehearsed it. "Yes, that man is harassing residents. He won't identify himself. I want him removed." Reyes turned to Dad. "Sir, do you have ID?" Dad reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out a folded leather case. Opened it, held it high. Reyes blinked. "Oh," it clicked. Ma'am," he said, his voice hitching. "This is Sheriff Holt." Karen froze. What she asked, like she hadn't heard him. "He's the newly appointed sheriff. We got the notice 2 weeks ago." Karen turned back to my dad. But you weren't in uniform," Dad chuckled. "Didn't think I needed one to unload a lawnmower?" For a moment, the air hung still. Even the wind paused. Reyes looked like he wanted to melt into the sidewalk. Karen, for the first time since she stepped foot onto our lawn, had nothing to say. She turned on her heel, stormed off, and slammed her door. But it wasn't over. Not even close. Later that night, Dad poured a glass of iced tea and sat on my porch. I joined him. "You know," he said, "that woman didn't just make a mistake. I nodded. She had a plan, I said, and she thought no one would stop her. Dad tapped his badge, lying on the table beside him. She just messed with the one person who will, and by the end of that week, we'd find out just how far her fake HOA reached. Fake fees, fake threats, fake titles, and one very real reckoning. By the next morning, it wasn't just about my dad. It was about everyone Karen had steamrolled with that damn clipboard. We found the first clue in our mailbox. No postage. Just dropped in sometime overnight. A folded HOA citation printed on letterhead that looked like it was made in Microsoft Word 2003. Violation unauthorized vehicle on public road. Fine $175 due within 7 days. Remit payment to Ridgegrove Residential Standards Board, a division of the Ridgegrove Hillside Community Association. The only problem Ridgegrove Hillside dissolved 5 years ago. Dad scanned it, then looked at me. Wonder how many of these she sent. I got mad all over again. We should go door to door. He shook his head. Not yet. Let's gather facts first. He always said real law enforcement isn't just about busting people. It's about building airtight truth, the kind no one can twist. So that's what we did. We pulled records from the county registrar. Nothing under Ridgegrove Residential Standards Board. No operating license, no tax ID, no formal homeowner's charter. Just an expired P.O. box filed years ago under a dummy LLC. Karen had been sending these notices out for months. We checked with local banks off the record. Turns out, several elderly residents had been paying their fines via cashier's check or direct Venmo transfer to an account listed under K.R. Civic Enforcement. We dug up over $14,000 in 6 months. No hearings, no voting, no appeals, just threats and silence. My dad took it personally. He didn't just want her stopped. He wanted the system she built to collapse in full view. That Sunday, we invited our neighbors over for barbecue. Nothing fancy, just ribs, iced tea, and some folding chairs in the yard. Dad greeted everyone like it was church picnic day, but about halfway through the brisket, he asked any of you ever get a notice from the HOA. The reactions told the story. People glanced at one another, hesitated, then nodded. Mrs. Davenport, who lived alone 2 houses down, spoke first. She fined me for leaving my porch light on past 10 p.m. Said it was against the nighttime ambiance clause. I paid it. I didn't want trouble. Mr. Kwan chimed in next. She threatened to tow my car if I didn't replace my curtains. Said they weren't shade compliant. Another neighbor pulled out a crumpled yellow notice. Failure to edge lawn uniformly. $50. That was the breaking point. My dad stood up and said loud enough for the whole street to hear. Listen close. There is no HOA. There hasn't been for years. And any fines you paid went straight into her pocket. This isn't code enforcement. It's fraud. You could hear the gas echo off the fences. But there was one more thing we hadn't uncovered yet. The surveillance. That came a day later. Dad got a tip from a retired code officer who lived nearby. He'd been harassed by Karen too. And after ignoring her noise ordinance threats, his garden gnomes were mysteriously smashed. His dog got sprayed with something that left its fur stain green. He installed cameras, and what he caught chilled us both. Karen walking down the sidewalk late at night with a flashlight, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other, snapping photos through people's windows. She had a whole drive folder she'd shared with her inner circle labeled Repeat Offenders. Notes included too many cars, probably illegal tenants. Immigrant families, check property records. Visible kids' toys, she low income. She wasn't just running a fake HOA. She was profiling people, targeting them. And worst of all, she had followers. People always assume that when the villain falls, they fall alone. But the truth is, villains like Karen don't work solo. They surround themselves with silence, and they reward complicity. That's how they grow. That's how a fake HOA becomes a real threat. We found the first name in a shared Google Doc. Stanley Cripps, an insurance adjuster who lived 3 streets over. He was listed as Code Compliance Deputy, a made-up title Karen had given him in exchange for, quote, enforcing aesthetic standards on the West End. In practice, Stanley was the guy who left anonymous threats in people's mailboxes. You're lowering our property values. Your driveway needs pressure washing or you'll be reported. Think about your neighbors before choosing garden flags. All unsigned, all intimidating. Dad brought Stanley in for a talk. Nothing official, just two men on a bench behind the town rec center. Stanley broke in under 10 minutes. She told me I was protecting our standards. He said we had to keep the neighborhood from slipping, that we couldn't let outsiders think they could do whatever they wanted. Outsiders, Dad asked. You mean people with different last names? Stanley looked away. She said it was about values. He mumbled. Dad stared at him for a long time before standing. Son, there's nothing valuable about fear. After that, the dominoes fell quick. Emails, screenshots, Venmo receipts, testimonies. Dozens of people came forward saying Karen had either recruited them or threatened them into silence. Some were residents, some weren't. One was a part-time realtor who fed Karen tips about who was moving in, especially if they didn't look like they'd fit the Ridgegrove lifestyle. It became clear Karen had built a network of petty tyrants who'd weaponized neighborhood pride into exclusion. And now, with the sheriff's office involved, they were running scared. That week, Dad made a public statement in front of the town hall. Not in uniform, just a flannel, boots, and that calm, unshakable tone. There are two things you should know, he said. First, there is no legal HOA here. Second, no one, and I mean no one, has the right to intimidate their neighbors with made-up rules and fake authority. A crowd of over 200 gathered. When he finished, they clapped. Some cried, some hugged. But Karen, she wasn't at that meeting. She was busy posting. Her final attempt to spin the story came in a Facebook live stream titled, "Targeted by a Corrupt Sheriff, My Side of the Story." She stood on her porch, hair pulled tight, surrounded by fake citations she claimed were part of a smear campaign. She called my dad a puppet, me a troublemaker, and everyone who turned on her ungrateful traitors. She ended the video with a line that was supposed to sound strong, but came off as desperate. They may have the badge, but I have the community. Except she didn't, because that night, people began pulling her signs out of the ground, tearing down the phony no parking notices she'd posted, covering her compliance zone banners with handmade signs that read, "We are not her HOA. This town belongs to all of us. Community means everyone." One woman, a 73-year-old who'd been fined $300 for irregular mailbox paint, walked to Karen's porch and dropped her receipt on the welcome mat. Then she rang the bell and walked away. We served the warrant the next morning. Fraud, harassment, unlawful surveillance, use of false legal documents, over a dozen charges, more pending. Karen tried to act shocked, tried to call it a misunderstanding, tried to say she was just helping maintain order. But by then, the whole town knew what she really was. She was a bully with a clipboard, a con with Wi-Fi. And she got caught because she called the cops on the one man who'd seen people like her for 30 years and knew exactly what to do. It didn't end with handcuffs. It ended with conversations. Hard ones. The kind that make neighbors shift in their chairs, make old wounds throb, and make people finally ask themselves, why did we let her get away with it for so long? Karen pled not guilty at first. Of course she did. Claimed it was a misunderstanding of paperwork, that she was acting on behalf of the community, and that everything she did was in the spirit of local pride. But the evidence didn't care. Surveillance photos, bank statements, a spreadsheet labeled households that need pressure, a literal hit list with color-coded tabs, people she wanted out, people she deemed non-compliant. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all 13 counts. Sentence 8 years, 3 to serve, the rest on probation, $42,000 in restitution, and a permanent restraining order from ever managing any neighborhood organization again. But the punishment wasn't the point. The point was what came after. We rebuilt Ridgegrove. From the ground up, Dad held town forums not about crime, but about courage. He let people speak who hadn't been heard in years. Single moms, veterans, refugees, the elderly. even teens. People who had lived under Karen's fake rule, people who paid her compliance fees, who repainted their shutters because she said it was too urban, who pulled down pride flags in fear of fines. They got to talk. And more importantly, people listened. The old HOA sign at the entrance of the neighborhood. We tore it down together. In its place, the community voted on a new mural, a long row of hands painted in every shade imaginable, planting a garden together. Underneath it read, "No more gatekeepers, just neighbors." Dad stayed on as sheriff. Not because he wanted to, because people asked him to, because the town learned something the hard way. Sometimes the loudest authority is the fakest, and the quietest strength is the one that saves you. I walk the block now and see what changed. Mrs. Davenport's porch lights are back on. Mr. Kwan's curtains are still purple. The kids ride bikes without being told they're a nuisance. And chalk art covers sidewalks like a badge of honor. No fines, no fear, no Karen. As for me, I learned something too. My dad didn't need to be the sheriff to make a difference. He just needed to stand still while someone else tried to erase him and refused to disappear. Call to action. If someone's ever tried to silence you by badge, by clipboard, by fear, remember this: authority without truth is a lie. Power without consent is theft. And silence. Silence is the soil where oppression grows. Speak up. Stand with your neighbors. Question everything that hides behind rules. And if you ever get a fine in your mailbox from someone you never elected, make damn sure they know your dad's the sheriff, or at the very least make sure they know you're not afraid anymore.